really excited for today's panel discussion on curriculum leadership, which we fondly refer to as the heart of the teacher leader role. And our panelists today are just really passionate about the power of curriculum leadership. We have two teacher leaders who are also former participants from our course, Curriculum, the Heart of the Teacher Leader Role. We have Priyanka Resource, who is a middle school EAL specialist at the International School of Panama. And we have Josephine Byrne, who is the team leader of the German team in the primary school at the International School of Zug in Lucerne. We are also joined by one of our PTC graduates, Viki Swan, who is just in the middle of a transition. She finished up her role as the middle school principal at the International School of Panama, and she is transitioning into her new role as the Director of Teaching and Learning at the American School of Taichung. And we have Ruth Heron with us, who is also another PTCer. She is the Director of Teaching and Learning at the American School of Guangzhou in China. Our panel is going to be discussing questions that were generated by people who were originally registered to take the course with us in Miami. As you're listening to the panel discussion, I would encourage you to send us questions using the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. And if we don't get a chance to answer your specific question live today, we are saving a transcript of all of the questions and we will get a response to you offline, but just give us a couple of days to do that. I also wanted to encourage you to use the chat feature to have conversations with each other while we are discussing questions. So we know that there's so much experience out there, and today is about sharing strategies and learning from each other. So if you hear the panel discussing something and you've had a similar experience, found a strategy that worked, a tool that worked, a book that you love, please share that information in the chat as well so we can all walk away with new tools that can help us become better in our leadership practice. So with that, we are going to start our panel discussion. And the first question that we're going to talk about is one that is always asked in the curriculum leadership course, and I think one that people are interested in and also struggle with a little bit. So the question is, what are some strategies that you can share on how to facilitate a curriculum review? And Ruth, I was hoping that you could get us started with some thinking around this.
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually one of the resources that I've shared is our school's curricular review process. I'm super proud of it. It's very cohesive, and what it is it works on a 5-year schedule, and your subject area will come up for review every 5 years, and there's a very formulaic research-based method by which we review your subject area, and this is pre-K all the way through grade 12. But I think the most important part of that is the actual review year. So you have a review year, you have an implementation year or a development year, an implementation year, and then 2 years, which we term as continuous improvement. And that's where you can make these small tweaks, like maybe not whole systematic changes, but small tweaks to make the curriculum more relevant to the students. So in that first year of the review year, we have subject area heads from each of our divisions. So lower elementary, upper elementary, middle, and high. And those are our representatives, and we come together multiple times throughout the school year, and we base everything we do off of research. So our first few meetings are really just diving in deep and seeing what does current research say about, for example, the social studies, and what is best teaching and learning practices within that. We create a research summary, and from there we extrapolate what is our philosophy statement as a team. So what do we believe to be true about social studies education? And from that, we then extrapolate what are our essential agreements around what does classroom environment look like in the social studies classroom? What does instruction look like? What does assessment look like? And once we get like those big building blocks of what do we know to be true, from there we can conduct our self-study. So what do kids think about our curriculum? What do parents think about our curriculum? And what do we as teachers think about it? We take all of that data and we use it to create commendations and recommendations. And again, this is all in that file that I've shared out. So it listed out point by point. And I think just by going very, very slowly and very intentionally about creating those commendations and recommendations about our program as a whole, that we're able to ensure that we have best practices represented and that we're also representing the vision and mission of our school. At the end of that year-long process of creating the commendations and recommendations, we pause, and then we start up the next year with actually developing the curriculum. So like building the proverbial boat before we take it for a sail. So.
Great, thanks, Ruth. I really love the fact that you include student voice in your curriculum review. That's a unique feature that I haven't heard a lot of schools use. Joe, I know that you also have some thoughts about how the curriculum review process works with your team, and we would love to hear some of the strategies that you use.
Thanks. I think we come from a very different angle in that we don't have a structure, we don't have anything that's brought onto us by a whole school. So as a department, I've had to create something that will help us to review the curriculum. We've had very little guidance. We're a PYP school, but for additional language, there isn't really very much apart from teacher language. So we're doing that, and we've reached the stage where we needed to review it. And for me, the biggest part of it was we needed to be really clear why we were reviewing it. What are we looking for? What are we hoping to find? And the pinnacle, I guess, for PYP would be looking at action and agency. And if the learning's been successful, you'll see action and agency. So we looked at the definitions of action and used that as a lens for looking at the units from early years to grade 5, and tried to track, I guess, where we saw student action, where we saw authentic agency in action as well, and try to kind of pattern that together. So we're in the process of doing that at the moment. I don't think I've got any big guidelines onto how to do it, but the biggest thing for the team was to have a cohesive reason that we all understood, that we could all work together towards, that will then give us the next steps, which involve kind of, I think, cutting away some units, deepening some units, but this platform gives us that to start with.
Thanks so much, Joe. I think many people find themselves in similar situations to what you've described, so that's a really helpful starting point. Another question, and I think this is going to be another popular question given our current realities, has to do with leading your team remotely. So somebody asked, developing, implementing, and monitoring the curriculum are all very collaborative tasks. What suggestions do you have for leading this work with your team in a remote environment? And Viki, I was hoping you could start us off with this question.
Perfect. I agree. This is a really great question. And I know as someone who felt that we had some really positive structures in place in regards to how to structure our meetings and our agendas, when we transitioned online, there were definite discrepancies and differences that we need to make sure we were supporting everyone and supporting all the different things that were happening by moving online. I think one key thing, whatever the meeting may be about or what the topic is just to have a really strong awareness of the needs of a variety of members. So whether your team is 5 people that are attending, or it's 500 or full faculty or whatever the number may be, it's very important to be aware of the people that need to get it done. So they come into the meeting and they're like, just cut to the chase, I get through the agenda and move on, versus those that are also being isolated or that are missing those social aspects of having meetings face to face. So I think the first thing to do is just an awareness of the different types of needs of the population. Something that I've found positive as we transition or in any meeting is starting with a connection, which is a school reform initiative protocol. It's really simple. It can be 2 minutes. It can be as long as you want it to, but it is just an opportunity to use a prompt or a question to get people in the right mindset for whatever your meeting may be. So I've used, for example, I may ask, what color describes your feelings today? And it gives me an idea of the room, and that works best with a smaller group for sure. But then you may want to say something like, what's the best thing that happened online, so that you're also learning from each other. Also, keeping agendas really concise and precise. Keep it simple, and also using somewhat of an accordion effect in regards to your agenda. So starting with everyone possibly together and then letting them go out into breakout sessions so that they have a opportunity to process in a small group, and then bringing that team back together as a whole group to discuss collectively what was your outcomes or what was your discussion points. And also, I think it's really important to, it's so complicated because body language is such an important part of it. This is really tough because I can't see my audience right now. However, when you're online, it's really important to read the room. And it's not about you. You're not doing anything wrong if no one is speaking, if all the cameras turn off. It's just where people are in that moment. So it's really important to recognize if you need to call a meeting, but again, let folks know, like, hey, it seems like I'm sensing that we're just not in the headspace to do this right now. So let's pause. You can stay on and ask questions, or you can stay on and talk about your favorite recipe or whatever it may be. So again, you're looking at those different needs of the group, but just honoring like big emotions. I think that's a really tough part of being online. So yeah, that's what I have to share on that.
Great, thanks, Viki. Does anybody else want to add? Ruth, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, definitely. And something to look at with the agendas I'd like to add on to what Viki said is I like to structure our agendas around essential questions, and to make those essential questions the same every week that I check in with our PLC leads. We have a large community, a large school, and so it works in our best interest if I just talk to our PLC leads or our professional learning community leads. And every week we have the same 4 variables that we're talking about, and they are questions with answers, and if there's no answer to them, then the meeting gets cut short. And so like really making the most effective use of people's time and not keeping them on the phone for very long, and 30 minutes or less if I have it my way. And those are things just like, where's your curriculum at for this week? And by this time, the PLC lead will have checked in with their entire department, so they know where everyone's at, and they can really quickly report back to me of like, where's everyone at? What are major assessments coming up? How's communication with students going? What's going really well? What is maybe not going very well? And what are some things that I need to have on my radar in order to make sure that I get that problem solved before it confronts our teachers? And we do it every week. And it's allowed us to actually come together fairly well as a team, even though we're working remotely.
Great, thank you, Ruth. Priyanka, yeah.
Yeah, I'd also like to add in regarding agendas, being a team leader with my advisory team, something that we put up as our motto was efficiency rules and be clear and consistent, so having that agenda is really, really important. And then having mottos like this will also help, run a meeting smoothly.
Great, thank you so much. All right, another big question that's out there is getting to this idea of standards. So how do you develop a shared understanding of what meeting standards looks like with your team? And Joe, I was hoping you could get us started with this question.
Thank you. I think I'm going to come from a slightly woolly sounding place with this, because we, again, don't have necessarily standards. We don't have a national curriculum that we have to follow. So we have a scope and sequence that we've developed over time. And the challenge for us is to ensure within the additional language that we have the same understanding of what each phase means within that. And for that, really, it's about looking at student work, looking at student learning, and just kind of pulling that apart as a team together. We've done that in various different ways, whether it's looking at writing samples, which I find is it's a bit bland really, but when you can actually record the students, when you can get those those live movements of seeing that learning and bringing that back, then you can actually, we just tend to track it down the scope and sequence. Do we all see the same thing? If we don't see the same thing, what are the discrepancies? And then when we find discrepancies or agreements, kind of working out what they really are. Are they misunderstanding of the wording? Are they misunderstanding of what the students actually produced? Are they a misunderstanding of the task, or all those variables that fit into it? But really, it's about having good communication and trust within the team. And that sort of that psychological safety aspect is, I think this, I want to tell you this is my opinion, but I might think that you think I'm wrong. So that trust has been really, really key to it. So it's a bit woolly around the edges, but we'll go around conceptual, I think.
Thanks, Joe. I think that trust piece is really important, because if you want to have open conversations with your team to talk about student learning, people have to feel really safe and comfortable to share their thoughts without worrying, like, is somebody going to think that I don't know what I'm talking about? Does anybody else want to add to this idea of helping people come together to understand what meeting standards looks like? Viki.
Yeah, sure. Really quickly, something that we used in prior years at ISP, and what I hope in Taichung moving forward, I hope that we really maximize data teams, which sounds super boring, but when you talk about that psychological well-being, when you remove it from my practice, because teaching is so intimate, and you're looking for learning from clusters of students, not a particular child. I mean, those conversations happen elsewhere, but in regards to really diving deep into understanding what a standard means and what it looks like, it's taking that power standard, looking at what the verb is, because people probably get tired of me here. Ruth is smiling because she's heard me say this. I'm like, it's all about the power verb too. So really, if it says model, then how do we identify what a model of blank looks like? And then bringing in those student samples. And we also transitioned to standards-based reporting this year. So we were really looking at the descriptors and saying, what does achieving really look like? And then how are we communicating that? So our creation of rubrics was a collaborative process within departments. So we were really honing in on, as Joe was saying, the scope and sequence of what does that look like for a 5th grader entering middle school, as well as a 9th grader when they exit. So it was, I think it's a really rich process that it removes those intimate aspects and allows us to create a common language and understanding of what we really want learning to look like at each level throughout the school.
Great, thanks, Viki. Ruth, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, definitely. Power standards have helped to streamline this conversation. I mean, we've got so many standards. So if we can get down to the most essential, most important learning, which I'll talk about power standards later on, but creating rubrics around those power standards and ensuring those rubrics are vertically aligned and that they're created by that vertically aligned team that we have within the secondary school has really helped to align what does this standard look like at grade 6 versus grade 8, and how do we bridge that gap and get kids there.
Great. I think that's actually a perfect transition into our next question, which is what are some ideas or strategies that you can share about how to develop a vertically aligned assessment plan, specifically in grades 6 through 12? Ruth.
Yeah, so this is another one of those resources that I shared out that Kristen's going to send out, and it's a protocol for how to have a vertically aligned assessment conversation. And this was originally written for the intent of using it in the primary school, but it's worked all the way up through the secondary school quite well. And what it is, within the secondary school, we have, whenever we are building out our curriculum, we as a team decide together what is our vertically aligned power standards, or what are our power standards for the whole school. And once we have that, we work backwards to design the curriculum, and we design it around, okay, if this is our clustered power standards, what does an assessment look like with those standards? And we talk through it, it's like a story. And so as a team, we tell that assessment story, working our way up. And then from there, we build our units. And any subsequent changes to that storyline or to those assessments, we come to that decision as a team so that we're all clear on what's the story of a 6th grader going through the social studies department. And obviously this is a work in progress that we're doing as a school, but I think just by having those really intentional conversation of what does it look like at grade 6 and grade 7, and then meeting the gaps there as a team. But great protocol that I've shared with Kristen that will go out as well.
Great, we'll be sharing those out with everybody soon. And I love that analogy of a story, because we all know like the power of a story, and being able to talk about student learning through story feels like a really important way to have some conversations around curriculum. So I wanted to ask another question, and as a curriculum leader, I think this is really important, and that's how can we be sure that the written curriculum is actually being taught? I think all of us have found ourselves in a situation where we have a conversation about curriculum, and then perhaps what we discuss in a room is not the same thing that's happening when you go into a classroom. So Viki, I was wondering if you could share some strategies with us about how we do ensure that the written curriculum is actually being taught.
Sure. I think it's a great question. And I think it's also a really tough answer, a tough thing to answer. And it has it's a very multi-tiered response. So when I think of how do we ensure integrity of our programs, what comes to mind, but again, as an administrator, I had the privilege of being able to have some flexibility to dedicate time to doing walkthroughs. So there's kind of three areas, and one is the walkthroughs, another is instructional rounds, and then the third part is just allowing a platform for rich discussions, which I think we've all alluded to at some point already. So in a walkthrough, I think the primary purpose of those is to kind of get that bird's eye view of possibly I would, for example, go through all the grade 7 classrooms, and then I was a liaison between what I was seeing across the whole grade level, and I could take that to a grade level team and then say, hey, I saw some commonalities, I saw some common language, I saw some opportunities for some cross-curricular planning, and this is part of your curriculum, and this is part of let's mesh this together. So that was one opportunity to ensure fidelity of a program. Another is instructional rounds, where it's a bit more, it's not as specific as, hey, in grade 7 social studies and grade 7 English, I'm seeing this, let's connect them. It was more on getting kind of, for example, in August, I may do instructional rounds on learning targets. Are they posted? Can students speak to them? And it was more about collecting data about a division or the whole school. And this year we actually did do some whole school data collection. Then from there, it's again providing those rich conversations. So if it's specific to going back to the learning targets, if I notice that only 75% of the classes posted, but only 50% of the kids in all grades could actually speak to their learning, then that, again, it took away that people feeling personally responsible for us not meeting our goal, and basing it on data and saying, based on the instructional rounds, we looked at learning targets, we looked at student ability to describe their learning, and then saying, how do we move that up and how do we improve those numbers? So that would, yeah. And again, just removing that. I know teacher, again, it's so intimate. And when you say, oh, we didn't meet our mark, I know the first response, every individual as teachers, we say, oh my gosh, I didn't do well enough. So again, just saying collectively, this is what the story shows us. And I love that assessment story, but just the story as learners, as professional learners as well, and using that as our stepping point or our springboard for conversations.
Great, thanks, Viki. We have time for one more question, and I also think this is one that perhaps could come up every day this week, and that has to do with being in a leadership role, being in that teacher leadership role, where you sort of find yourself in the middle between school leadership and between teachers. And so somebody posed the question, what are some suggestions that you have for someone who's starting in a new teacher leadership role at a school that you've actually worked at for a long time? And Priyanka has some ideas for us. She's been at her school for a long time and she's had a variety of roles. So I think we're going to have some good strategies from her. Priyanka?
Yes, thank you, Kristen. So yes, as Kristen mentioned, I have been at the International School of Panama for over 17 years. And I've had various leadership roles, my last one being team leader for grade 7. And I kind of have like a policy, or it's actually like mottos for myself. And so one of them is earn the trust of your team. And I think trust has come up in various other conversations today. And that is really, really important, that your team trusts you because you are their voice. Another thing that I do have is, have strong people skills, because you are representing them. And if you are able to be that positive voice, that will help you and your team shine. And my number 3 motto is, build those strong relationships, not only with your team, but also with your administrators, because you are that middle person. You are representing your team, but you're representing your school. And so if you do have those strong relationships with your administrators and your teams, you will be able to be a strong teacher leader. So, this is the way I kind of sum up my teacher leadership. And I'm looking forward to moving to another grade next year as team leader. So I have been a grade 7 team leader for the past 3 years, and moving to another grade now, means working with different teachers. So I'm looking forward to following the same realm and, to see how I would be able to work with the new group.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. I think that's really helpful advice. Okay, we are going to transition into our resource share for the day. We have a lot of different resources that our panelists have selected that are some of their favorite tools. And we're going to start off, Ruth, I think, can we start off with you sharing your resources? I've seen some questions and comments in the chat, and so I think once people hear about your resources, that will answer some of those wonderings.
Yeah, so I shared 3 resources because I couldn't make a choice, but I shared the AISG's Curriculum Review Cycle Guide, which lays out step-by-step what we do as a school. So again, if anyone has questions with that, feel free to email is what I've responded to a few participants, but it really just sets off task 1, this is what you do. Task 2, this is what you do. And it's all based in research and empirical studies. So yeah, and I've seen examples of that at a lot of other schools. So it's like ask, borrow, steal, and so use that research.
I like that, ask, borrow, steal.
Teacher's creed, right? Kidding. The other 2 documents I shared out it's another AISG PLC leader document, but it's what our expectations for what our PLC leaders do, and in that is included example agenda minutes. And topics and how to write those down. And so that's something that we share out with people. And I find that's really useful for conducting important meetings around student learning and targeting data and not targeting individual practice, kind of what Viki was talking about earlier. And the final one is our vertical alignment protocol. So how do we have great conversations around assessment and learning amongst the different grades and divisions.
Great, thanks, Ruth. Joe, could you share your resource with us? I'm actually very excited about Joe's resource as well because I haven't seen it before, so I'm adding it to my list.
Which one's is this the one you've not seen?
That's correct.
It's all backwards, sorry. I don't know how you reverse that. This is, so I discovered through Nancy, I discovered Twitter last year. She's responsible. And these research ed guides, I think they're very much a UK based university-driven, research-driven set of teachers, and they all produce different things. But this lady Claire Seeley has produced or has edited this guide. And the really nice thing about it is it does have a bit about primary school, which for me is really important. Primary tends to kind of get a bit squished, but it's lots of different ideas based around current research. And the key idea that came out from me from this one chapter that I read was about I guess the trap of teachers wanting to see the curriculum as what they do in the classroom rather than the learning and the conceptual and the broader picture and the value of having the broader picture complete before. I've just seen the chat. That's I just squished and woolly, sorry. I'm a creative person. So having the broader thing in place first before you then get to the nitty gritty of what people might do. So that I found really useful for that. The other thing I shared was the bit about the beliefs about curriculum, and I thought that was just really important for me coming into this sort of context and role, I guess, from being a teacher who believed that the curriculum was a whole written thing that you had to do and cover, to completely changing my perspectives on what that really is and what that means, and kind of going, that's what I've been looking for forever. So that document helped me then use that with the team as well, which is a really nice way of having that third point as well, that you're not the safety is all still there as well. So that one I would definitely recommend too.
Great, thanks, Joe. I love that you said that about covering curriculum and thinking about, I have a mentor and he has this quote that relates to what you said, and that is that we don't cover curriculum, we teach children. And so I think that's a really important takeaway. So thank you so much for sharing that. Priyanka, we would love to hear about your resource.
Yes, so the resource I shared is something that we developed for advisory this year. So we thought of taking up the SEL standards, so looking at the CASEL standards, and some of us were trained with responsive classroom, so how to merge the two together. So as team leaders with our administrators and the counselor, we developed a scope and sequence for the last school year that we would continue working on to build a very strong advisory program. And so what I shared is just the start of August, when we said, okay, we're meeting a new group of students. And I think the first standard that we could talk about was self-awareness, because we all need to know each other. And, that would build into team building, getting to know you activities. And so I shared one of those. And, then as the year went on, we looked at the other CASEL standards as well. And, went back to look at our scope and sequence and to see whether this standard actually matches the theme for this month. And so that's what we did in advisory, and that's the resource I've shared. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Priyanka. And last but not least, Viki, can you talk a little bit about the resources that you have selected to share?
Sure, I can definitely relate to Ruth. I couldn't pick one or two, so I have four. But they're all connected, and there was no way to separate them. So I think, as Pri was saying, the importance of making sure that our students are supported socially and emotionally. I think one of my biggest learners at ISP, and what I hope to continue at the American School in Taichung, is to really focus on those social emotional well-being of our faculty during every faculty meeting. So if it's almost like modeling what we're wanting for our students, but using our adult collaboration times to also model and practice and have fun. I am very much, the resource that I shared was from Robin Jackson. She has a will driver matrix that read about it, it's awesome. But what came out of that was her motivation matrix. And none of this is new, but she uses terms of like, there's typically four types of people that are in a meeting. So it's people that are wanting autonomy, they're wanting mastery, they're wanting purpose, and they're wanting belonging. This definitely relates to the compass points. I'm sure many of you have done that as well, or other personality tests. But what resonated about this one was she gives in her matrix, she relates that to how you move a teacher who has high will or low will, high skill or whatever, and how to move them to being a high will, high skill teacher leader. So again, great resources, but in a nutshell, I think why I selected these was because it is so important to not just get the task done, but to make sure that people are in that mind space, that headspace to get the work done. And this connects to, as teacher leaders, you can all, I'm sure it feels very daunting to do your job and lead others in school improvement. So I shared the OIQ factor from Bill and Oshan Powell. And that's just talking about the time management matrix of where we really spending our time, and is that where we need to be spending it. And then the last resource was about Teach or Lead Like a Pirate is the book. It is as fun as the title sounds, and it's just, I don't want to create the will. So in a nutshell, it's a great way to talk about developing your why and communicating the why, but doing it in a really fun and creative way so that people aren't feeling like, oh man, here's another initiative. It's an initiative, it's school improvement, but we're going to do it in a fun way where we all develop a really strong sense of community around our purpose and our why. So I hope you enjoy those.
Thanks so much. So for everybody out there who is like, how do I get these resources? I will be emailing them to everybody who has participated in the Zoom call. Will be receiving an email. It's probably going to be a couple of hours after we finish today, but I will send it. If for some reason you don't get the email, I know some of them have been going to spam, you can also check our Facebook page, the Principals Training Center, and then by the end of today, Eastern time, usually later in the evening, we have the video from today, this discussion posted on YouTube. And in that description of the video on YouTube, we also link the resources there. So there's 3 different ways that you'll be able to access all of these wonderful resources that were shared by our panelists. If you found today's discussion exhilarating, interesting, we're leaving you wanting more, we'd love to have you join us for our course, which is Curriculum, the Heart of the Teacher Leader Role. The next time that we are offering this course is at one of our 2-day Teacher Leader Institutes, which right now is scheduled in Bangkok at the end of September. There is a little caveat to that, in that we have postponed registration until the middle of August, because we're just very carefully monitoring travel restrictions, entry requirements, what the government restrictions are around the sizes of gatherings and meetings. If we run an event, we obviously want to make sure that it's safe and people can attend. So we will keep you posted on that and let you know if we're able to run that institute in September. And then for our closing today, we at the Teacher Leader Institutes and at our Teachers Training Center, we have a tradition which is called the Nugget of Knowledge. And typically when we run our summer institutes, we always finish our closing meeting with a nugget of knowledge. For our virtual community events, we have been having the trainers of our course provide that nugget of knowledge. And the trainer for this course, Nancy Squicciarini, unfortunately could not join us today, but she was with us last week and she did provide a nugget last week. So if you missed it, go to the curriculum day and you can watch it. So today we're actually sticking with our tradition and we're having one of our participants of the course provide that nugget for us. And Jo has kindly volunteered to share her nugget of knowledge with you. So Jo, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. And I guess it's down to Nancy that I feel that maybe I could do this. So that's a good connection, hey? I've got some notes, sorry about the rattling. So from the course last year, one of the things Nancy did say was that curriculum was the most resistant front of education. And it's led me over the year to think about the whole stale, male, pale thing and how we see curriculum. So my story is to kind of address that thinking, really. And there's a young lady currently now in my grade 4 class, but I've taught her since grade 2, so I've known her for 2 years. She's a very caring, lovely, keen student, very able, but the problem I've always had with her is that as soon as it comes to speaking in a foreign language, nothing happens. There's just nothing there, a complete block. And I've been spending the last couple of years thinking, how do I do it? How do I do it? The parents are, you must force her, you must force her. And I'm thinking, no, we're not going to do that. And the breakthrough actually came with the lockdown and with transitioning to online learning, unbelievably. And by applying our new learning principles. So this year, we've now got a new mission and vision, and we now have new learning principles. One of the learning principles is about the learning being meaningful to the student. And as I was looking at this young lady's learning, it occurred to me that she wasn't necessarily doing anything that was meaningful to her. And that was probably one of the reasons that she wasn't being able to communicate. So in the online learning, we changed the whole curriculum. We ditched some units. We changed it to communication skills rather than a connected unit to the homeroom. And as part of that, we sent out a cookbook in German, really as reading comprehension. I thought it was just going to be very simple, read the book, cook the thing, did it work, did you understand it? Not. But this young lady took the whole thing to another level by cooking the thing, sharing it with her family, videoing that. But she also then created an instructional video of how to use the recipe to cook and how to tell people how to do it. And the amount of language that came out of her when she was giving these instructions, that you take this and you do that and you create this and you read this. And when you read this part of the instructions, it tells you how to do it, all in the target language, completely out of nowhere. And for me, it really illustrated the need to be flexible with the curriculum and the need to see the curriculum as something that lives and breathes and is driven by the students, and you can change, you can change anything. There's no reason why you can't change things. So I guess the nugget of knowledge is, or the nugget of my learning really, is that it isn't a static, old-fashioned, dusty thing that's in a book on a cupboard in the wall, but it's something that the students live and breathe and the teachers live and breathe. And if you see it like that, then you can get much more powerful learning and much more agentive learning, I guess. That's where I got to.
Thank you so much, Joe. Very well said. Very well said. So I also want to just thank everybody for joining us today. As I mentioned, I will be sending you an email if you joined us on Zoom with the resources. We'll be posting those resources on Facebook and also on our YouTube page. I wanted to say a huge thank you to each of our panelists for joining us today. I think you each bring so much experience, expertise, and enthusiasm to the conversation about curriculum leadership. It's been a real honor to be able to have you share your experiences with us. So for everybody, go forth and learn, and we hope to see you again with us tomorrow on our discussion about assessment leadership. Bye, everyone.